You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Welcome to a crispy, fresh episode of Arcane Carolinas. Got that jalapeno flavored Cheeto crunch.
Oh.
Not flaming hot.
Jalapeno flavored Cheetos, I'd probably eat.
No, they're really good. They're really good. Not the flaming hot ones. The flaming hot ones aren't for me. It's called jalapeno, but you don't see it as often as the flaming hot.
I've never had this. I've never seen this before. I literally cannot remember the last time that I ate something like a Cheeto.
I can. So I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge some people that have been really gracious with their time that we have not gotten around to yet. If we have talked to you about a Case Files episode, or we have actually recorded a Case Files episode with you, we're going to get to those. It's just, I'm going to be a little vulnerable for a moment and shine a light on the fact that, Michael and I are people outside of this podcast.
I don't know. I'm not sure about myself.
You're people to me. Okay. I'm people to me. But everything is okay, to be clear. We're going to be all right. But it's been a bit of a period of change unexpectedly. And there's been a lot going on. I'm speaking for myself at this point. I take full onus on being the one that's like, marijuana. So to all the people that gave us time to record and we said, oh, we're going to get this done in November. That's on me. And, it's the end of the year now and we are going to get those episodes out. It's just been some competing priorities, I guess you could say.
Well, and to be fair, also, it's on me in that I'm in grad school. So I haven't had any time to edit, but I'm done with my semester now.
We are going to get to you and thank you for your patience and sticking with us, everybody.
Hey, this is Michael, just jumping in to note that the folks that we're talking about there are the folks who were in the Arcane Carolinas Case Files episode that we published a couple of weeks ago. So we did get that episode out. We even got that episode out before our apology for not getting that episode out. So thanks again to them for their patience. And now back to the episode.
Let's do a good old fashioned Charlie Took a Road Trip episode.
Yes. I'm into it. I really want to hear about this because I've been wanting to hear about this for weeks.
Yeah. Right before the wheels totally came off on everything, I took a trip. I went to the Outer Banks, specifically the island of Hatteras with Joe from the Cora Tree episode.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about Dare County a bit, so I won't do that. If you want the Dare County history, pop on back over to the Cora Tree episode. And I have several local businesses to plug that are not covered in that episode, but rather than just laundry list them because it was a bit of an adventure, I'll do them sort of in line as they occurred, like in the Bath series.
Sure. Makes sense.
I scheduled this trip to Hatteras with Joe months in advance and had planned on running down some details on a sea monster story that I really wanted to explore. It's an older one from 1903 that comes from right off Cape Hatteras, I guess that would be east off of Cape Hatteras. And what I wound up with instead was just a hell of an adventure with twists and turns and a whole bunch of insight into a lot of the things that probably shaped the works of Charles Whedbee.
Okay. The guy who wrote the original Cora Tree story.
Yes. And 3,000 books of varying degrees of accuracy.
Oh, may that one day be my epitaph.
But I don't know, it was sort of a big adventure where I came to understand him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of coastal lore in the Carolinas. We explored a lot of that in the Bath series, the Cora Tree episode, the Santa Clara disaster. And we've also alluded to a good chunk of what gets repeated around the Outer Banks is from Whedbee.
Yes.
Yes. And he wrote a series of books that's alleged folklore that by the final collection, it's pretty easily deconstructed to be lacking the seed of historical truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's fair to let everybody peek behind the curtain just enough to see that there is, in fact, a story that I found really fascinating and I was going to suggest as an episode and I was really into. And then I found that the first source of it was Whedbee. And then I found somebody else who had looked into it saying, this guy made up a lot of stuff. And the fact that he's the person who wrote this first and literally nobody has written anything other than a skin of his version means that it's fake.
Right. And before I left for the trip, I'm going to plug the new Carolina Haints book from Dan Sellers and Jeffrey Cochran. I cannot say enough nice things about the labor of love that this collection is. It's a fantastic book. And I was reading that before my trip, and there's a chapter in there about Ocracoke. And Dan went there and ran down a firsthand source named Philip Howard that confirms the locals agree that the first Whedbee book is great. Solid as a rock. Absolutely local folklore. And there's diminishing returns from there on in. But despite that, everyone is generally in agreement that they're fun stories. It's just the way that they're presented. So anyway, check out the Carolina Haints book. It's fantastic. So knowing this, I had actually put it out of my head to deal with any Chuckles stories. No Whedbee leads. I didn't want them. I went to the Outer Banks specifically to focus on the Tresco sea serpent incident of 1903, because as I was very clear in the Santa Clara episode, I really and truly believe that there are and have been creatures in the ocean that defy what anyone would call normal.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm going to start there with that story, and then it's going to kind of springboard into something else. You've been to the Outer Banks.
Oh, many times.
Yeah. So I had never been, just on account of there's other beaches much closer to where I live. And so I didn't really know what to expect. So if I mispronounce some island names, you're just going to have to deal with it because it was my first time there.
I recognize any mispronunciations. I'll let you know and you can re-record it.
Okay. So I came in through Manio on 64, and it was pleasant. It's a pleasant drive, but it's the kind of standard beach drive. And I'm just like, I don't really see what the big deal is. But then you hit Nag's Head, and I turned south on 12.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you make that turn, you're on Pea Island. And you can tell that human beings are not meant to be here.
Is it because there's so few of them, or is it because it's eroding as you watch?
So the island's a wildlife refuge.
Yeah.
There are people whose full-time job is to push the sand and crap back off the road because it shouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was dumbfounded by this as I was just like, you got all these front-end loaders and backhoes just going constantly. And I was like, this is weird. And I asked Joe, I was like, is that normal? And he was like, oh yeah, they're always there. They're actually building a new bridge. Like when you think of the Florida Keys, one of those big windy bridges, they're building that around Pea Island currently because of nature trying to take its course.
People who live on the Outer Banks who have been effectively cut off from the outside world multiple times because Highway 12 will just get washed out.
Yes, we are going to get to that because that almost happened to me.
Yeah, if anybody doubts that global climate change is real, they just need to go look at the Outer Banks for about 5 minutes.
Pea Island is weird. I was just watching machines push dunes back into place, and then they wave you by. You're like, oh, yeah, you can drive now. Okay. Very strange. So I already was like, man, this is weird. But then you hit a couple of small little beach villages, and it feels more normal. They even have those yellow, blocky mega stores that sell towels for $5 or whatever. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Oh, I do. I'm not going to say the name of the chain, but I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Lots of pictures of lions with a joint in their mouth and the Jamaican flag behind them and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. If you ever, I'm probably going to cut this from the episode, but if you ever want, beachwear that is labeled as family values and is exceptionally inappropriate for anything involving anybody under the age of, say, 70, then that's the place to do it.
You should absolutely.
If you want to see a busty woman dressed in a Confederate flag, that's the place to go.
Right. I think you should leave that in because that's what the towels are. Anyway, okay. So you pass a couple of those. I'm like, oh, I'm at the beach. I know this. I've seen this at every beach I've ever been to in the Carolinas. So anyway, I'm like, all right, that's fine. And I began to understand why people speak fondly of the area because I'm taking this in. I'm like, oh, it's cool. It's small beach. It's like little villages, right? They don't have the big high-rise hotels. And I'm starting to get it. I'm like, yeah, all right, beach town. So I finally get to Hatteras Island, which is roughly the site of the story that I wanted to investigate in the first place. The story actually taking place out on the water. And so the Tresco sea serpent incident comes from 1903. A guy named Joseph Austins Gray was the second officer on the SS Tresco. This story is corroborated by the ship's captain, W.H. Bartlett, First Officer Elias Griffiths and additional unnamed members of the crew about a sea serpent off the coast of Hatteras Island. So I did my thing. Ship stories are so easy to verify whether or not it's true because of shipbuilding logs and the companies and like all this stuff. And the Tresco was a cargo ship. It was built in 1889 by the Tyne Iron Shipbuilding Company. It had a pretty short run as far as ships go because it wrecked on the shore of Maine while loaded with timber in 1907.
Oh, whoops.
So 4 years after this incident. This is all documented and verifiable through commercial shipbuilding and trade logs. So the second officer of the ship related that on May 28th, 1903, the ship was on a voyage set for Cuba. And on May 30th, they were passing Cape Hatteras and around 10 a.m. observed a large disturbance in the water off the port bow. Austins stated that he watched the moving breaks in the surface of the water closely as they approached the ship from the southeast, and that he was surprised when it got closer that he could actually see it was a school of sharks swimming together with their dorsal fins breaking the surface, moving very swiftly as a unit in one direction. And he said in his log that it was very common to see sharks and they're, like break the surface a little bit with their fins.
Sure.
But in such a large mass and traveling at speed, this is a direct quote, "It seemed to me a phenomenal departure from anything I had heretofore observed in regard to these voracious and savage creatures. They were not attracted to the vessel by anything thrown overboard, but held steadily on their way."
Like, that is weird. I mean, that's very unusual to see in sharks.
Yeah, so I did a little digging, and apparently shark migrations are a thing, but obviously this man of the sea thought this was strange.
You see sharks a lot on the coast. I mean, not a lot, but, it's not like they're shockingly rare. But to see like a school of sharks is, as I understand it, is very unusual. It
was so unusual that it got entered into the ship's log as, and I quote, "school of sharks." Like, it was weird enough that they wrote it into the log. Like, saw this thing. So about an hour later, due southeast, the same direction from where the sharks had appeared, they observed a large dark object that appeared to be sitting on the surface of the water, but floating like very low. From the distance, they thought the color might be black. They thought it might be a derelict ship that had like capsized or something.
Yeah.
So they steered for it in case there was any bodies to recover or anybody that needed help or whatever. Take a minute to note that this part of the coast is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Yes. And one day we're going to do an episode about that because there's some really fascinating history.
Yes. I actually get into that a little bit further on. The sea, as they approached it, was described as calm and smooth, but oily. It had a sheen to it. And they realized that the object was moving towards the ship. And as they got closer, they realized that it wasn't a wreck or a raft, because in the words of the account, and I'm going to quote again, "Now swiftly, with a terrible uprising, a mighty and horrible head came out of the water, surmounting a tall, powerful neck that had the thickness and length of a cathedral pillar, yet spindly in proportion to the huge and awful head it supported."
Weird.
Right?
I mean, that's not maybe we saw something. That is very specific and descriptive and evocative.
It gets wilder. So the crew, apparently the entire crew freaked out and ran into the wheelhouse and wouldn't come out.
Who can blame them? My gosh.
So they're all sitting there looking through the little porthole. So they have this like incredibly detailed corroborated description. And these are estimates based on, what people saw. And this is what they reported. They said it was 100 feet long, 8 feet wide at its widest point, but the body wasn't like cylindrical. It had like a noticeable arch and like hump in the back where it possessed a webbed dorsal fin. Like, imagine those dinosaurs with the big fans, a fish with those types of things. So it sloped downward to the neck as well and the tail. So kind of like a camel is what I'm envisioning.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to say it's the same thing, but it sounds kind of Nessie-ish.
Yes. And apparently had large fins visibly working the water, like pumping the water and driving it on its side.
Okay.
And it was widest towards the front and tapered back from the hump.
That's so weird. I'm just take this moment to issue a shout out. If you happen to listen to this episode, Strange Animals Podcast, I would love to hear your take on this. They had a really interesting take on Twitter on the other sea monster story that we've already told.
Oh, cool.
And loved it. And I really love the Strange Animals Podcast. It's such a fascinating show. And so if you happen to listen to this and you've got an opinion, please let us know.
So the head was estimated to be 5 feet long from the nose to the upper extremity, and the neck was estimated to be 18 inches in diameter, which is pretty slender by comparison.
Yeah.
And it was smallest halfway between the head and where it joined the body. They stated that underneath the jaw seemed to be some sort of pouch or drooping skin.
Ugh.
And that the eyes were reddish and dull, that its hide, skins, scales, whatever you want to call it, they said resembled that of a crocodile or an alligator with varying sized plates. Like how, the plates get smaller towards the eye, but they're larger on the back kind of deal.
Yeah.
Apparently it was like a dull bronze color, and the captain and crew and everybody just sat in the wheelhouse and was just like, nope, and waited till it swam away.
And again, who can blame them? My God.
They entered it into the ship's log as, and I quote, sea monster.
Works pretty well as a descriptor.
Yeah. And I mean, so this one, there's not a whole lot to say other than I believe this happened. Like the Santa Clara disaster, the story's backed up by shipbuilding logs that confirm the ship existed, freight company logs that confirm its ownership that align with what the second officer said, actual day-to-day ship logs. These logs and accounts were provided to the press. The press went out, and I'm going to share some pictures and stuff here in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see these people, you can see the ship. The newspaper reports first started on June 17th, 1903 on page 12 of the Chicago Daily Tribune. And then a large format story, which is where I got most of the details, is from volume 12 of Wide World magazine. That's a collection. The volume 12 is a collection. It's like an actual magazine, but like once a year they would do like a here's everything at once. So the 1904 volume 12 publication dedicated to true narrative adventures, travel, customs, and sport. And it's been around long enough. It's free.
Sure.
It's fully available on the Internet Archive. Really fascinating read. Lots of good pictures, some of which I will put up on Facebook. Here, let's look at the pictures. So there's the guy. There's the second officer.
Okay.
There's the boat itself.
Gosh, that's not a boat. That's a ship.
Yeah, it's a big one. That's the captain.
I love all of these people's looks.
It was a different time, you see. You dressed real fancy to go on the ocean.
Yeah.
This is the chart showing the course of the ship and the monster. You can see where they turned towards it and they were like, nope.
I mean, like, for real, who can blame them? Imagine for a moment being aboard this ship. You are out in the water. If something bad happens, you know that there are countless ways to die.
Yes.
And there's very low chance that anybody would come and help you in time to help you. And you're sailing through the part of the ocean referred to as the graveyard of the Atlantic. And you see this come out of the water? Yeah, you've got a responsibility to get out of there.
Here's 3 more people, crew members, vouching for him.
Mm-hmm.
This is where they were when the monster was first sighted, recreating where they saw it. Actual copy of the ship's log, some notes from the captain saying that, yes, I swear that, what he's saying is true.
Sure.
An affidavit, I guess you'd call it, by the second officer doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like written in their own hand.
And just a funny title.
Saying, I certify that this is true.
Thought you'd get a kick out of that. And I'll upload all those to Facebook. I'll make an album. I just found this so interesting. The proximity to the Santa Clara sighting, the oily sea, the commonalities between the stories, and they occurred so far apart. The amount of detail. I don't have any idea what they saw, be it marine animal or some sort of aquatic dinosaur that was like last of its kind or what have you. So that's the story. And I had all that information before I went there. So headed to the Outer Banks, I decided it would be fun to kick around and see what kind of context I could just get from the area.
Sure.
So the very first thing I did after I dropped my bags off was went to the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum with Joe. He was basically my tour guide. He was like, I got you covered. He was like, what do you want to look at? I was like, well, this is, roughly the story. He was like, I got you, jump in the car. So we went over to the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum, and the mood, we were having fun, but a distinct creepy vibe. I already said that I felt like crossing Pea Island. You're like, we're not supposed to be here. It was windy. It was overcast. There was a big storm set to move in. And it's just kind of weird. And I was like, we better just get these details as quickly as we can. Let's take today and really hit it hard. So we went to the museum, puttered around for a while, and it was great. Loads of artifacts from wrecks, models of ships, tons of history. They have an authentic World War II German Enigma machine from a U-boat that went down off the coast.
Yeah, there were a ton of U-boats off the coast of North Carolina. Yeah. There's definitely an episode in that as well.
Really, really cool stuff. And of course, they had our boy Blackbeard the pirate.
Oh my God.
They had a whole section.
I feel like at some point the state legislature must have required that.
Right. I shared this with our Patreon backers. I didn't realize that there was a no photography in the pirate section rule. So I got the goods, man. I got the contraband photos.
Got those pirate pics.
Yeah, I got those deep cut photos from the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. Smuggled them out in my phone like a real pirate. Blackbeard would be proud. Yarg. So one of the things that we took from the museum, like after like reading about it and everything, there was no mention of this incident, but they do have a nice little map of known wreckage locations that you can explore around the island, which is awesome. Joe's got the truck permit. He's allowed to drive, on the sand. So we jumped in his truck and we went looking at wreckage. It's just such weird vibes, man. Like the weather was weird. Island itself is kind of weird. You're standing on top of old wreckage, looking down at it. Metal detectors and excavation are not allowed on the island. Just knowing like, well, somebody died on this. This is unsettling. And how much else is under this sand that just hasn't been exposed?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very unsettling when you really think about what you're standing on top of.
When they call it the graveyard of the Atlantic, they don't only mean the ships.
Right. And the museum does a really good job of acknowledging a lot of individuals, but there's probably so much stuff buried under the surface. And the last wreckage that we were looking at took us down towards the inlet between Ocracoke and Hatteras. And so we're standing there. And I'm looking and I'm like, that is a legitimate untouched forest there. The same way Charles Whedbee described the location of the Cora tree in that story. Now, I know where the tree that says Cora is and the Homeowners Association talks about it and all that. And I'll get to that in a minute. But I really kind of felt like, well, maybe this is what he was talking about. Like this kind of forest. When he envisioned making that story, this is what he had in his head. So I was like, let's do this. Let's go in. We went through the witchy woods, just started exploring, and it's dark and overcast and windy and weird, and eventually popped out on the other side of the island through the forest into a little patch of beach, like a tiny little 10-foot patch of beach surrounded by trees. And we stood there watching the currents, which are crazy to watch. The wind is whipping up the waves. I looked down at the sand and I saw weird little animal tracks. So I very sarcastically was like, the Whedbee Wampus. But I really did wonder what they were, because it wasn't a bird. It wasn't hooves. It lacked the pad in the center that like a mammal, like a cat or a dog would have. Fortunately, my brother-in-law, he does a lot of conservation work with animals and is an avid wildlife tracker and photographer. And that's his business, that's what he does. So I took a picture of these like 4 claws or digits like perfectly in a row in the sand. So I took a picture of that. I was sending him to him, and as I'm doing that, an entire tree fell into the water and started getting swept away by the current.
Whoa.
So needless to say, I'm not feeling welcome at this time.
Yeah.
So I took a little video of it slowly being rolled over the sandbars in the inlet, and it was freaky. And I was like, we'll see what my brother-in-law says. He got back to me and said, that is weird. I don't know what that is. It's definitely an animal. Glancing at it, he came to the same conclusion. He was like, doesn't look like a bird. It's not a hoof. It's odd that there's no pads or anything evident. I'll post the pictures on Facebook, and maybe somebody can tell me, hey, ding dong, this is what it is. But at this point, I'm really appreciating how this island could capture someone's imagination, especially during the winter months where there's not a lot going on and it's overcast and weird and not very what you think of beach vibes. On the way back, we came across an old rusty metal tower, which I guess is for like a weather station or something. So I found a hole in the fence that someone had made, and I climbed the tower.
Thank you, teenagers of the world, for enabling stuff like that for everyone.
Because I wanted to get a view of just how big this forest felt like from the top. And I did. I made it about 3/4 of the way up. And again, it is windy as hell. That's when I noticed that one of the support bolts was rusted through. So I very slowly went back. But I got a really nice picture.
I'm just going to point out again. Okay. Because you kind of understated it when you said it. You saw an abandoned observation tower behind a chain link fence that had a hole ripped in it. You crawled or climbed through this fence. You crawled.
Yes.
You climbed this abandoned observation tower, and you made it 3/4 of the way up. How high is 3/4 of the way up? I ask this in a sense of horror because I can't get more than like 3 rungs up on a ladder without the vertigo taking over. So I am curious.
I don't know, like 25 feet.
Okay. Just gonna let that sink into my brain and please continue.
And this is the part of the episode where we always say, don't trespass, kids.
Yeah, don't do this. Don't try this at home. Like, literally, don't do this. We're not wink, wink, nudge, nudge about that.
Yeah, no, like, seriously, don't
this.
do that. I was mad at myself when I got to the part where I could now discover that it was actually detached. And I was like, this is such a stupid way to die. This is real dumb. There's no glory in this death. No. So I quietly went back down, but I got a nice picture. And again, I really started to appreciate just how weird some of the vibes could be.
Yeah.
So we decided that, I was like, well, I got to see the famous lighthouse and the Cape Point and everything. So on the way, I saw the Hatteras UFO, which is a funny little mid-century saucer-shaped house. Like, those. Yeah. So somebody has one of those fiberglass things preserved on the island. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
Once we got to the lighthouse, the wind is really howling, and out on the point, it's just insane to see the currents smashing into each other and like just reshaping the way things are in real time.
Mm-hmm.
There's some nice memorials for soldiers whose remains were covered from wrecks out there. And on the way back, we passed a road called Whedbee Lane, and I was like, this dude is everywhere.
Bless his heart.
Yeah. Then it was time to be like, all right, we're done. So we hit up this spot called Tavern on 12, which was really good. I wanted to plug that local business. Fantastic. I ate way too much food. Saw a black cat on the walk back and immediately was like, Whedbee Wampus. So I was a little into my cups at that point, and to say that I was feeling sufficiently spooky would be accurate. I didn't find anything that mentioned the Tresco during all of this.
Oh, okay. In some ways, compared to the rest of the stories in this area, the Tresco is kind of small potatoes, given that it didn't wreck, nobody died, and they just kept sailing.
Right. But I was feeling really good. I was like, man, we got a gem of a story here. Like, this is an Arcane Carolina story to preserve because it hadn't been told so many times. And I was feeling really good about that, but completely unnerved because now everywhere we went, people were talking about the storm.
Oh,
the incoming storm. And it was, creepy vibes. So the next day, there's a huge front coming in, big uneasy vibes. Weather warnings start going off on phones. The TV is like giving warnings, saying they expected the road on P Island to just not be there.
Oof.
Yeah. So we puttered around a bit. I looked at the Cora tree. I got a kick out of it. I put an Arcane Carolina sticker in there. People fill it with trinkets.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
The inside is very hollow from rot. I don't think it's long for this world, but people have put little trinkets and tokens and mementos in there. So I put an Arcane Carolina sticker in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was neat to see, right? Check out the Cora Tree episode if you want that story. It made me chuckle. No pun intended. So we went to a record store. I was like, oh, let's look at that. So we go in there and started talking to the lady in there. And she was like, oh, yeah, the road's going to be out till at least Tuesday. That does not work for me. I need to get back on Sunday. It is now Saturday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So after a quick deliberation, I decided that there was still more work to be done in the Outer Banks and that I did not want to go home. And Joe did not want to go home. So we popped over to Manio, which is the island above P Island, and home to the Lost Colony. And they have an old school Pizza Hut there still, which I was very pleased about. It's called like Pizza Hut Classic or something like that. I thought that was really nice. I didn't go to it, but I thought it was nice. So after kicking around Manio and looking at stuff and searching for adventure, we rent a room at a place called the Scarborough Inn. Nice place, great staff, very affordable. Rooms are filled with mismatched antique furniture.
Okay.
At least ours was. We got this room. It was a great room, huge room. It had 3 beds and like cool old antique chests of drawers and rocking chairs. And I'm like, getting a little haunted house vibe here. They have the eeriest green light out front on their sign, which I will post a picture of. But I can't say enough how great these people were. Great place. A little creepy, a little spooky.
I love it.
Wind is howling, eerie green light coming in from outside, antique furniture. I'm into it. Walked across the street to some place called Stripers, and I actually ate myself uncomfortable there. I really like seafood, and I was just like, give me all the seafood and fry it twice. So I was like, I don't think I'm up for adventuring tonight. So we were going to go to the Fort Raleigh historic site in the morning. The storm comes in. Roads closed. Made the right choice. Absolutely made the right choice. The road's like already gone by Sunday morning. So we go to Fort Raleigh, and there's this theater back in the woods in this National Historic Site where they do productions of a play called The Lost Colony.
Yeah.
Yeah, very famous, very famous. Really cool to see. Gorgeous theater, super neat. I'll post a picture of it. Kind of Renfesty, but I like that.
It's a hugely important and long-running production and is an exceptional example of outdoor theater in the Carolinas.
So I'm puttering around and I'm taking pictures of like artifacts from settlers and historical markers. And then I notice an oak tree, and it's got a little plaque, and it's dedicated to a local woman, pillar of the community, theater actress named Cora.
No way.
This is someone that Charles Whedbee 110% would have known, and who I believe is the namesake of the Cora tree story as a way to kind of honor her.
That's wild.
Born in 1910, Cora May Basnight was a woman with a deep love of the town of Manteo, very involved in its businesses. She raised her 7 children there, and her son, Mark Basnight, served 13 terms in the North Carolina State Senate from 1984 until 2011. Cora loved the arts, specifically Roanoke Island's outdoor theater drama, The Lost Colony, written by Paul Green during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
The play opened on July 4th, 1937, and was intended to run only one season through the end of the summer, but has had a summer season ever since, with the exception of a couple of years during World War II. Beginning in 1957, and for 27 years, Cora May Basnight played the role of Agona, a Native American woman in the Lost Colony.
And when did Whedbee publish the Cora tree?
1989. It's her.
It's her.
Right.
It's got to be her. He saw the tree and the plaque and thought of her and wanted to honor her in some way and wrote this story.
The bridge that connects downtown Manteo to Roanoke Island Festival Park, is named the Cora May Basnight Bridge. Like, she is a big, important person in the history of this area. And I believe that this should be considered the real Cora tree.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
So I'm standing there reading about Cora, just got word that the road had washed out. And I like felt this weird sense of like, well, the islands showed me what they needed me to know and want me to leave.
I definitely have felt that feeling in other circumstances and respect that. Yeah.
So I ate a boring lunch. I had a salad to offset all the damage I had done to myself previously. Not even worth mentioning the place because it was completely unremarkable. I had a nice ginger beer there, but whatever. And just the historical markers, the wreckage, the memorials, the weird paw prints, claw prints, whatever you want to call them, the lookout tower, the storm, everything culminated in me being like, all right, I get it. I'm sorry. The Outer Banks are truly unique and special. I get it. I'm sorry. Blackbeard is still overplayed.
He's unnecessary to the Outer Banks being a special place.
No,
we don't need him for the Outer Banks to be special.
But yeah, big thank you to Joe for facilitating that. Big thank you to Grayson for helping me look at animal paw prints, claw prints, whatever you want to call them. Big thanks to the Internet Archive for having the artifacts needed for the Tresco investigation. And thank you to you for listening to me ramble about being in a strange place.
But this just blows my mind. If I remember correctly, the Cora tree was in Whedbee's last book also, wasn't it?
Yep.
Was it the last story in Whedbee's last book?
I don't think so. I think it's nestled somewhere in the middle. I don't have the book handy right now. It's packed up.
That would be like a little extra dramatic touch. It absolutely has blown my mind that you went there and have found not only the truth behind the Cora tree story, but the fact that there is truth behind the Cora tree story. Mm-hmm. And the fact that a story, I feel so bad for making fun of it now, because this story is like such a beautiful monument to someone who was clearly important to a place that he loved. Yep. That he saw in her years and years of service and work a real love for that area, and he wanted to honor that himself and his love for the area.
Yep.
That's amazing.
That's why when I came back, I was like, I need a minute to figure out how I want to talk about this, because it kind of upended how I felt about that story and him.
Yeah. I mean, this completely just flips my entire attitude about that story. Now I kind of love that story.
Still think Captain Eli Blood is the stupidest name for a character that's supposed to be real.
Could have named him something like Captain Eli Smith.
Jones.
Right. That's beautiful that he wanted to honor her in that way. And it's great that he got to work that into his own artistic expression of his admiration for the area.
So there you go, folks. Arcane Carolinas. We don't make fun of everything.
But this is something that I've talked about on panels at conventions where we've appeared and stuff like that. And this is something we've said in the show too. If something is presented as historical, then I feel like there's a real obligation to be as accurate as possible, as well researched as possible, and as factual as possible. And so, for instance, your story of the Tresco is like a perfect example of that. You went and found the primary sources. You went and found literally documents written in their hand, photos of the people who made these reports, and a map of the course of the ship over the duration of this event. That's history. And when something is presented as just entertainment, well, then it doesn't have to be factual. I don't hate Avengers movies for not being true, like that's the point of fiction. It's cool that there's stuff out there that's purely for entertainment that is not factual because it's for entertainment. It drives me crazy when somebody is presenting something as historical and there is no fact behind it and they're embellishing a great deal. But this feels like somebody whose career kind of evolved into fiction writing. And, he fudged the borders by calling it folklore.
Yep.
And then he used it to do something really sweet.
Yeah.
Sorry, now I'm processing it.
Right? It takes a second. Based on everything that we thought we had known before, it takes a second to process it. This episode will be out in December.
Oh, yeah.
So happy holidays, everyone. I hope you're doing well. We'll get back on our game. Also,
we're going to, in the notes to this episode, we're going to link to that book that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, we're good. Oh, I have many links to share.
Okay, good deal.
We'll link to the Internet Archive where you can read the account on your own. We'll link to Charles Whedbee's something about the Cora tree. We'll link to the businesses. It's, a lot of stuff. This one felt like a return to form for me to go and find all this stuff. And I was just like, it felt really good to do this.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like there's something that I think is worth pointing out and discussing, but it's never going to probably be a whole episode. So I'm going to take this opportunity right now, is that if I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. There have been circumstances in my own life and my own explorations where I looked around and realized, oh, the universe is telling me something right now, or my surroundings are trying to tell me something right now, or whatever, or that spooky house is trying to tell me something, or that abandoned building, or this abandoned building that I'm standing in, or whatever. And I think that it is vitally important, if anybody does ever choose to go on explorations, to be very aware of their surroundings and open to that sort of instinct, message, whatever, however you want to frame it. So recognize that moment when you have gotten what you need and they are ready for you to go.
Yeah.
There's a really fascinating genre of horror from the late 19th century. And a really good example of it is probably, and I'm going to mispronounce his name. I think his name is pronounced Arthur Machen, but it might be Machen or Macon. I'm not sure. Machen. And a really good example of this genre of horror is his story called The Great God Pan. And the bottom line is there was a genre of horror in the 19th century, the basis of which was, what if nature isn't necessarily hostile to us? It just doesn't care.
Right.
It's just so different from us. And the natural world is so different from what human life is like now, that a human out in nature is presented with an awareness that is sort of disturbing, that is a closed system that does not necessarily have room in it for people. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, the work of authors who wrote that kind of stuff influenced Lovecraft. And there's a lot of really fun, weird horror in that genre. The original story, Wendigo, is in that genre. And it's about nature changing a person. And that kind of stuff is really fascinating. And so if anybody listening wants spooky reads in that sort of same mood, then go find The Great God Pan or go find the original version of Wendigo.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut. Check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.